In this episode, you'll learn what you do on the recovery and how it affects the power phase.
Feel the grip of the oar handle, smooth yet firm in your hands. Taste the salt of your own sweat and the occasional splash of water. It's all part of the journey. Welcome to another episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Each week, our host, Masters rowing coach Rebecca Caro, dives deep into the world of Masters rowing. Whether you're on the water or in the gym, join us to become a faster master. Let's go rowing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Faster Masters Rowing Radio. This week, we're talking about compounding technique errors. That's a slightly clumsy phrase that I invented because what I want to think about is what you're doing technically on the recovery and how the last thing you probably do as you approach the catch is likely to be the first thing you do in the power phase. And so if you're not quite approaching the catch correctly when you're on the recovery, you almost certainly won't be approaching the power phase correctly when you transition to making the next stroke. Now, that sounds a bit complicated. Let's dive into a little bit of detail. Shoulder lifting is something that if you do it, you can be sure that your coach will have mentioned it quite a lot to you. It's not ideal because what it means is that as you approach the catch, you put the blade in the water, not by pushing with your feet to take the initial part of the power phase, you actually lift your shoulders to make the connection. So it's about often feeling the connection, but it's also caused by what you've probably done on the recovery. In order to prevent shoulder lifting, you start at the end of the previous stroke. As you take your oar out of the water, what you're going to do is take it out of the water, feather it, and then straighten your arms and then let your body shift so that you pivot from the hips to be rocking forwards. I like to call this pre-stretching. So before you get to the catch, your body is pre-stretching. Your legs stay straight. You might feel the stretch in your hamstrings. You might feel it in your lower back, but you're getting your shoulders forwards of the hips. Now, you don't have to do this completely with your legs straight. You might have achieved your pre-stretch maybe by quarter slide. But pre-stretching helps to set your forward body angle. And one of the reasons why people do the body angle lean late in the recovery is because you feel like you're getting more length. But in actual fact, what that causes is for you to focus on the handle. And then when you start the power phase, you're pulling, not pushing. Using a lift of your shoulders helps you to feel like you're creating connection between the handle and the foot stretcher. But your goal is actually to create that connection with the minimum amount of movement in your body. And ideally, it's a movement that is from your knee to your ankle. So it's just pushing your knee out and your thighs don't move and your shoulders don't move and the angle of your back doesn't change. And also your arms don't bend. One of the compounding elements is that if you reach for more at the catch, this really slows down your catch. And that leads us into the next thing that I'm going to talk about. But the reason this happens is because your body weight, as you lean forwards when you're quite close to the catch, this causes the stern to push down into the water, which consequently lifts up the bows. And so you then have to lift the handle and push to make a connection with the water, but you're working against yourself because your body's lunged forwards. That's pushed the stern down. That means that it's harder, the height above the water that your blades are is higher because the bows have just lifted up. And therefore, your blade is highly likely not to be in the water when you think it should be. Now, if you don't shoulder lift, you have a greater chance of being on time for the catch, for the placement into the water. So the key here is to get a good pre-stretch off the finish to help prevent you shoulder lifting when you come to the catch. Our next compounding technical error is rushing the slide. Now, basically, our goal overall is to link you to the boat to the blade to the water, and then to accelerate the boat on the next stroke. But when you're rushing, what you tend to do is to accelerate the slide as you go from the second half of the recovery. So basically from half slide into full compression, which is where you should be placing your catch. And so if you can then use the exact same pre-stretch idea that we talked about earlier, this allows you time because your body is already forward, your shoulders are forward of your hips, and that gives you time to decide how fast to roll into the catch, because you don't need to get there quickly, because all you need to do is to bend your knees. You don't need to change anything in your upper body. You don't need to straighten your arms because that's already happened. So basically, when you rock over, that promotes a feeling of connection to the foot stretcher, because it's very hard to feel pressure on your feet when you're leaning backwards at the finish. But once you rock forwards, you've got your arms extended, you do the pre-stretch and just release your knees. You can likely feel pressure under the soles of your feet. And that helps you to then feel that you're in control of the slide speed. Now, causes of rushing can be that your handle speed and your body rock over speed are too slow at the finish. And you may feel then that you have to rush in order to catch up with what everyone else is doing in the boat, because you're trying to follow what stroke or stern pair are doing. So if you feel you have to rush into the catch, that might be a cause. Take a look at the elbows of the person in front of you, unless of course you're at stroke, which is a little difficult. But anyway, take a look at the elbow speed, their outside elbow in sweep and both their elbows in sculling give you a clue as to how quickly they are straightening their arms. And once their arms are straight, their shoulders should then move away from you as they body rock. So you can use that to ensure that you're in time at the finish. Now, another cause of rushing is you are rowing longer than anyone else. And in order to get to full slide, perhaps you've got much longer legs, you have to go quicker in order to get there on time. Now, we had a situation recently in my 8 where bow pair was saying that we're feeling rushed, that we can't get to full slide before the next catch. And our diagnosis was that in the middle 4, there were a couple of people who weren't in time getting their arms straight and their body over. They were slower than everyone else. And as a consequence, when they got onto the slide, they were having to rush. And then that meant that bow pair, who were getting their arms straight and their body over in time, they felt they should start the slide at the same time as the people in front of them, who were starting the slide before they'd fully got their arms straight and body over. And as a consequence, bow pair didn't have enough time to complete the slide maneuver. Now, another cause of rushing is ratio. If you're rowing on a very 1-to-1 ratio, so the amount of time that the oar is under the water compared with the amount of time that the oar is out of the water is the same, so it's a 1-to-1 ratio. If there is insufficient power in the water, you won't be able to get, say, a 2-to-1 ratio, being twice as long on the slide as you are through the power phase, or even 3-to-1 if you're at a low stroke rate. So if the ratio is 1-to-1, it can be pretty hard to do the recovery correctly and in the right sequence without rushing. Another reason is just a general lack of awareness of your own slide speed. If you feel that you might be rushing, check a couple of things. Is your body weight on the back of the seat? Can you feel that your butt is leaning backwards rather then your body weight is under the part where your thighs join your butt. So that sort of forward weight forward on the seat. And secondly, mindful of that foot stretcher pressure, which I mentioned earlier, that will help you to get a good forward body rock. And when you've got that, then you'll find it more noticeable how you are sliding and the speed that you're sliding. Tension in your legs, particularly your hamstrings, is another reason why people rush, because if you have tight calf muscles and your hamstrings are activated and you're using them to pull yourself up the slide, then it's quite easy to rush. If you're rowing at low rate, you should be able to release your knees at, say, quarter slide, just pop when you pop your knees up, and then actually to relax those muscles and let the forward momentum of the boat be the thing that pushes you up the slide. So it really helps if you have a clear mental picture of what a well-timed catch looks like and how to arrive on time and to have your oar in the water on time. And interestingly, that was the exact same final point I made when we were talking about shoulder lifting earlier. So rushing and shoulder lifting can both be enhanced if you have a good mental picture of what a good catch looks and feels like. Our third thing this morning is going deep. When you put the oar in the water, the oar then buries a little bit too deep under the water at the initial part of the power phase. So, compounding technique errors here. Starting on the recovery, if you don't press down at the finish to get the oar fully square out of the water before you feather it, so you're basically feathering your oar out of the water, this means that your handles will be a little high as you're coming up the recovery. The compounding issue of that is that in order to square and not hit the water, you then have to push your handles down so that as you then come up the final bit of the recovery to place the blade, you then need to lift your handles up, and you tend to overdo the lift, and as a consequence, the oar goes too deep in the water. Now, if you're pushing your handles down in order to square, this also causes you to drop your shoulders. And then when you get to the timing of the placement at the catch, you then tend to lift your hands and also lift your shoulders because they're tense, because you've had to drop your handles in order to square. And that tension in the shoulders basically causes you to go deep because your whole body block tends to lift up. So you lift up from the hips in order to put the oars in the water, which is back to the beginning of when we were talking about shoulder lifting. So causing the whole body block to lift from the hip in order to lift the handles is a big movement. And ideally at the catch, we want to minimize the amount of movement that we have. So your ideal is to arrive in the last half of the recovery with your body pre-stretched, your arms extended, your handle at the correct height so that you can square the oar without having to push the handles down in the boat so that they're closer to your legs. So if your handles are already close to your legs, as you square, you can then start to lift the handle up so that the amount of upwards movement that you make on the handle is small. And you can do that just with your arms, not with moving your shoulder or your back. And so again, squaring late, I think also can cause a late catch, mistiming the catch. And that doesn't necessarily make your oars go too deep. But if your oars do go too deep, take a good look at what you do at the finish and whether that is a compounding technique error that leads you then to mistime the catch. I've spent today mostly talking about problems, not necessarily about solutions. So some of the things that I think will be helpful, get a video of yourself from square off. 3 strokes is all you need, and slow it down. Watch it slowly, frame by frame. Have a model to compare to so you know where your movement diverges from the model, and think carefully about what you're doing at the finish, getting the oar out of the water and pre-stretching your body and your arms ready for moving on to the slide on the recovery. Till next time, bye-bye.
We are part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your fellow rowers about the show. If you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.